She pulled him down onto the sheets, laughed softly. And in that moment, David realized he'd been living his entire life in black and white, until Maya showed him color. David had always been the quiet type. You know those people who think twice before speaking and 3 times before making any big decisions? That was him. At 32, his life was pretty much the same every day. Wake up, coffee, work at the computer company, come home, watch some TV, sleep, repeat. His apartment was neat and organized. Everything had its place. His books were arranged by height on the shelf. His clothes hung in the closet, sorted by color. It wasn't that he was obsessive about it, it just felt safer that way. When everything was in order, there were no surprises. But that Tuesday evening, his college friend Alex called him up. "Hey man, I'm having a small get-together this Friday. Just moved into a new place and want to show it off. You should come." David's first thought was to say no. He always said no to parties. Too many people, too much noise, too much small talk about nothing important. But something in Alex's voice made him pause. "Come on, David. When's the last time you went out, like really went out?" David couldn't remember. That was probably not a good sign. "I don't know, Alex. I'm not really good at those things." "That's exactly why you need to come. Look, it's not going to be some crazy party. Just a few people, some food, maybe some music. If you hate it, you can leave after an hour." David found himself agreeing before he could talk himself out of it. Maybe Alex was right. Maybe it was time to do something different. Friday evening came too quickly. David changed his shirt 3 times, wondering what people wore to these things. He settled on a simple blue button-down and dark jeans. Nothing too fancy, nothing too casual. Alex's new place was in the older part of town, one of those converted warehouse buildings with big windows and exposed brick walls. David could hear voices and soft music as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. His heart was already beating faster. When Alex opened the door, the warmth hit David immediately. Not just the temperature, but the feeling of the place. People were scattered around the living room, sitting on couches, leaning against the kitchen counter, talking in small groups. It felt comfortable, not like those loud, crowded parties he'd imagined. "David, you made it." Alex grabbed his shoulder and pulled him inside. "Let me get you something to drink." As Alex led him through the room, David's eyes wandered over the faces. Most people seemed to be around his age, probably other friends from college or work. Everyone looked relaxed, happy to be there. That's when he saw her. She was sitting by the big window that overlooked the street, holding a cup of tea in both hands. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she was watching the conversation happening near her with this small smile, like she was enjoying a private joke. What struck David most was how comfortable she seemed with herself. While everyone else was trying to be part of the group, she looked perfectly content just observing, but not in a lonely way. More like someone who was choosing to be exactly where she was. David accepted the drink Alex handed him and tried to focus on the conversation Alex was having with some guy about work, but he kept finding his eyes drifting back to the woman by the window. After about 20 minutes, David excused himself and walked over to the bookshelf near the window. Alex had always been a reader, and David was genuinely curious about what books he'd chosen to display in his new place. He was looking at a worn copy of a novel he'd read years ago when he heard a voice beside him. "You look like someone who actually reads those instead of just keeping them around to look smart." David turned and found himself face to face with the woman from the window. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a warm brown with little flecks of gold. She was smiling at him, not in a polite social way, but like she was genuinely amused by something. Yeah, I do read them," David managed to say, holding up the book he'd been looking at. "This one's actually pretty good." "I love that book," she said, moving closer to see the cover. "The way he writes about loneliness in big cities. It's like he can see right into your head sometimes." David felt something shift inside his chest. Someone who understood that book the way he did was rare. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand. "Maya," she replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm and warm. "So how do you know Alex?" David asked. The usual party question, but he genuinely wanted to know. "We went to art school together about 1,000,000 years ago. He was terrible at painting but great at making everyone laugh. During the boring lectures, Maya's eyes crinkled when she smiled. What about you? College roommates. He's the one who convinced me to study computer programming instead of just hiding in the library all day. And do you like it, the programming? Most people asked what he did for work and then immediately changed the subject when he said computers. But Maya seemed actually interested in his answer. I do, actually. There's something satisfying about solving problems, making things work the way they're supposed to. It's like putting together a puzzle, but you're creating the pieces as you go. Maya nodded thoughtfully. That sounds a lot like photography, actually. You're trying to capture something real, but you have to figure out all the technical stuff. First, the camera, the light, the timing. All those pieces have to come together for one perfect moment. You're a photographer? Trying to be. Right now, I mostly do weddings and family portraits to pay the bills, but I just got back from this project where I spent 3 months driving around to small towns, taking pictures of people in places that most people never notice. David found himself leaning forward, drawn into her story. What kind of places? Diners at 6 in the morning with the regulars drinking coffee and reading newspapers. Old men playing checkers in the park. Kids riding bikes down empty streets. Just life, you know? Real life, not posed or fake. As Maya talked about her project, her whole face lit up. She used her hands to describe the shots she'd taken, the people she'd met, the stories they'd shared with her. David couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone so passionate about their work. The conversation flowed easier than any David had experienced at a social gathering. They talked about books, about the strange way city life could make you feel both connected to millions of people and completely alone at the same time. About how they'd both almost decided not to come to the party. I was sitting in my apartment looking at Alex's invitation thinking, I should really go, but I have this new book I want to read, Maya said, laughing. I was thinking the exact same thing. Well, not about a book. I was planning to reorganize my closet. Maya's laugh was genuine and contagious. Reorganize your closet on a Friday night? David, you definitely needed to come to this party. Time seemed to move differently while they talked. The noise of the other conversations faded into background, and David found himself forgetting to feel awkward or worried about saying the wrong thing. When people started leaving and Alex began cleaning up, David realized they'd been talking for over 2 hours. I should probably head out, Maya said, looking around at the emptying room. Did you drive here? David asked. No, I took the bus. I like riding public transport. You see interesting people and you're not stuck in traffic getting angry at other drivers. David saw his chance. I drove. I could give you a ride home if you want. Maya considered this for a moment. That's sweet of you to offer, but I actually like the walk to the bus stop. Helps me think about the day. David felt disappointed but tried not to show it. But Maya continued, if you want to walk with me to the bus stop, I wouldn't mind the company. The walk to the bus stop took about 20 minutes, but somehow it stretched into 2 hours of wandering through the quiet streets. They discovered they both loved the way the city looked at night, with most of the noise and rush gone, leaving just the streetlights and the sound of their footsteps. Maya pointed out details David had never noticed before. The way shadows fell across building, walls creating accidental art, how different neighborhoods had different rhythms, different feels. She saw beauty in ordinary things that David walked past every day without seeing. When they finally reached her apartment building, Maya turned to face him. This was really nice, David. I'm glad Alex convinced you to come tonight. Me too, David said and meant it completely. Maya reached into her small purse and pulled out a pen and a coffee shop receipt. She wrote her phone number on the back and handed it to him. Call me if you want to continue this conversation sometime, she said with that same easy confidence she'd shown all evening. As David walked back to his car, the receipt carefully tucked into his wallet, he realized something had changed inside him. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. David stared at the coffee shop receipt for 3 days before he got the courage to call Maya. He'd pick up his phone, dial the first few numbers, then hang up. What if she was busy? What if she'd forgotten about him already? What if that connection he felt was all in his head? Finally, on Wednesday evening after work, he just did it. His heart was pounding as the phone rang. Hello? Maya's voice sounded warm and familiar. Hi, it's David. From the party on Friday. We talked about books and… David, I was wondering when you'd call. I thought maybe you'd lost my number or decided I was too weird for talking about photography for 2 hours straight. The relief in his chest was immediate. No, not weird at all. I don't usually do this kind of thing. What kind of thing? Calling people? Meeting someone and actually wanting to see them again? There was a pause, and David worried he'd said too much too soon. But then Maya laughed, that same genuine laugh from the party. Well, I'm glad you're breaking your pattern. Are you free this Saturday afternoon? There's this little coffee shop I love, and I promise I won't talk about photography the entire time. Maybe only half the time. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. David found himself thinking about Maya throughout the week, not in an obsessive way, but like background music that made everything else feel a little brighter. He caught himself smiling at work for no reason, which earned him some confused looks from his coworkers. The coffee shop Maya had chosen was nothing like the chain places David usually went to. It was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and local artwork covering the walls. Maya was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. I got you coffee, she said as he sat down. Black, no sugar. You seem like a black coffee person. She was right, and David was impressed she'd noticed. Thanks, how did you know? You have very honest reactions to things. People who drink fancy coffee drinks are usually trying to complicate simple things. You seem like someone who appreciates things the way they are. David wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but coming from Maya, it felt like one. Over the next hour, they talked about everything. Maya asked questions that made David think about his life in ways he never had before. Why had he chosen to work with computers instead of people? Did he ever feel like he was watching his own life instead of actually living it? What made him happy? Really happy? Not just comfortable? These weren't the kind of questions people usually asked on dates. David wasn't even sure this was a date, but Maya had a way of asking them that didn't feel intrusive or judgmental. She genuinely seemed to want to understand him. I think I chose programming because it's predictable, David found himself saying. When I write code, I know what's supposed to happen. If something goes wrong, there's always a logical reason and I can fix it. People aren't like that. But that's what makes people interesting, Maya said, stirring honey into her tea. You never know what someone's going to say or do next. It keeps life from getting boring. Boring doesn't sound so bad sometimes. At least with boring, you know what to expect. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying his face. David, can I ask you something? When's the last time something really surprised you? Not a bad surprise, but a good one. Something that made you feel excited about what might happen next. David thought about it, really thought about it. Meeting you, he said finally, then immediately felt his face get hot. Sorry, that probably sounds… It sounds honest, Maya said softly. And for what it's worth, meeting you surprised me too. I didn't expect to spend 2 hours at a party talking to someone who actually listened to what I was saying. Their second date was the following week. Maya had suggested they go for a walk through the city center, but not just any walk. She brought her camera and showed David how to really see the place he'd lived in for years but never actually noticed. Look at that, she said, pointing to where afternoon sunlight was streaming through the windows of an office building, creating patterns on the sidewalk. People are walking right through it without seeing it. It's like accidental art. Maya showed him how to notice the way shadows fell, how people moved through spaces, the expressions on faces when people thought nobody was watching. She took pictures of things David would have walked past without a second glance. A cat sleeping in a shop window, an old man feeding pigeons in the park, 2 kids sharing an ice cream cone. Why do you photograph ordinary things? David asked as they sat on a bench watching Maya change the film in her camera. Because ordinary things are only ordinary until someone really looks at them. That old man feeding pigeons? He comes here every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. I've seen him 5 times now. He brings the same brown paper bag, sits on the same bench. Those pigeons know him. They start gathering before he even sits down. That's not ordinary. That's beautiful. David started seeing the city differently, through Maya's eyes. Colors seemed brighter. He noticed details he'd missed for years. The way morning light hit the windows of his apartment building. The sound different neighborhoods made. How his own reflection looked in store windows as he walked to work. But it wasn't just about seeing things differently. Maya had a way of asking questions that made him examine his own life more closely. Not in a critical way, but with curiosity. "Don't you like living alone?" she asked one evening as they shared pizza at her apartment. "I always thought I did. It's quiet. I can do things on my own schedule. No one moves my stuff around or leaves dishes in the sink." "But do you like it?" David considered this. "I think I like the idea of it more than the reality. Sometimes the quiet feels a little too quiet, you know?" Maya's apartment was the complete opposite of David's organized space. Photography books were stacked everywhere. Art supplies covered half the kitchen table. Film containers and camera equipment were scattered across her desk. But instead of feeling chaotic, it felt alive. Like someone actually lived there instead of just existing there. The walls were covered with her photographs. Not just the pretty ones, but pictures that told stories. A woman laughing so hard she was crying. A construction worker reading a book during his lunch break. Kids playing in a fountain on a hot day. Each image captured a moment that felt real and important. "Your place feels like home," David said, looking around. "What does your place feel like?" Maya asked. David thought about his neat apartment with everything in its proper place. Like a waiting room. Waiting for what? I don't know. I think that's the problem. As they sat on Maya's couch looking through photo albums from her small-town project, David became aware of how natural it felt to be close to her. The way she leaned against his shoulder to point out details in the pictures. How her hair smelled like something floral and clean. The sound of her breathing. But it was more than physical attraction. Maya made him feel like the most interesting version of himself. When he talked, she listened like what he was saying actually mattered. When he made a joke, she laughed like she meant it. When he shared something he was worried about, she took it seriously without trying to immediately fix it. "David," Maya said as they looked at a picture of an elderly couple sitting on their front porch holding hands. "Can I tell you something? Of course. I've been on a lot of first dates and second dates. Usually by the third time I see someone, I've figured out that they're not really interested in knowing me. They like the idea of dating a photographer, or they think I'm going to be their adventure girlfriend who makes their life more interesting, but they don't actually want to know what I think about things or what matters to me." She turned to look at him directly. "You're different. You ask me questions because you want to know the answers, not because you're trying to impress me or get somewhere. That's rare." David felt something warm spread through his chest. "You're different too. You make me feel like maybe I've been hiding from my own life without realizing it. Maybe we both have been," Maya said quietly. As David drove home that night, he realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow as just another day to get through. He was actually looking forward to seeing what might happen next. And that feeling, that sense of possibility, was something he'd never experienced before. 3 weeks into October, David and Maya had settled into something that felt like a rhythm. Tuesday coffee dates had become regular. Weekend walks through different parts of the city were expected. David found himself checking his phone more, often not out of anxiety, but because Maya had started sending him pictures throughout the week. A funny sign she'd seen. A cat doing something ridiculous. The way light looked different at various times of day. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. David had stopped by Maya's apartment after work, which had become comfortable and natural. She'd been sitting at her computer, trying to edit photos from a wedding she'd shot the weekend before and clearly getting frustrated. "This stupid program keeps crashing every time I try to adjust the brightness," she muttered, clicking her mouse harder than necessary. "I swear technology hates me." Let me take a look, David said, pulling up a chair beside her. Sometimes it's just a memory issue. As he leaned over to examine her computer screen, Maya suddenly pushed the laptop closed and turned to face him. There was something different in her expression, more serious than usual but not worried, more like someone who had made a decision about something important. "David," she said quietly, and something in her tone made his heart start beating faster. "Yeah? I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you start thinking too much about it. You know how you do that thing where you analyze everything to death before you respond?" David nodded, already starting to feel nervous. Maya took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you." The words hit David like a physical force. Not unpleasant, but overwhelming. He opened his mouth to respond, but Maya held up her hand. "Wait, let me finish. I can see you doing that thing, where you're already thinking about all the reasons this might be complicated or scary or too fast. I can practically hear your brain working from here." She was right. His mind was already spinning through a dozen different scenarios and concerns. "The thing is," Maya continued, "I've never felt this way about someone before. Not this. Comfortable and excited at the same time. Like I can be completely myself around you, but also like you make me want to be a better version of myself." David felt something warm and terrifying spreading through his chest. "And I can see you holding yourself back from this," Maya said, reaching out to touch his face gently. "From us. Like you're waiting for permission to feel what you're feeling or for some guarantee that it's safe." Her touch was soft and warm, and David realized he had been holding his breath. "David, there are no guarantees. Love doesn't come with a warranty or a user manual, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it." David looked into her eyes, those warm brown eyes with the gold flecks that had caught his attention that first night at Alex's party. Everything Maya was saying was true. He had been holding back, protecting himself from the possibility of this kind of connection, even as he'd been drawn deeper into her orbit every day. "I'm scared," he said finally, the words coming out quieter than he'd intended. "Of what?" "Of messing this up. Of not being good at this. Of caring about someone this much and then losing them." Maya's expression softened. "David, you think too much about the wrong things. You spend so much energy worrying about what might go wrong that you forget to pay attention to what's going right." She stood up from her chair and took both of his hands in hers. "Don't think about it right now," she said, reading his expression perfectly. "Don't analyze it or try to figure out what it means or where it's going. Just be here with me. Right now. This moment." Maya led him toward her bedroom, not with urgency or drama, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. Her bedroom was like the rest of her apartment, lived in and comfortable, with photographs covering the walls and books stacked on the nightstand. When they reached the edge of her bed, David hesitated. Not because he didn't want to be there, but because he could sense they were about to step into something that would change everything between them. Some moments you can't take back, and this felt like one of them. Maya seemed to understand his hesitation without him having to explain it. Instead of trying to convince him or reassure him, she simply smiled and pulled him down onto the sheets with her. She laughed softly as they fell together, a sound filled with joy and affection and something that might have been relief. Then she wrapped her arms around him like she had no intention of ever letting him go. "See?" she said, her face close to his. "Nothing terrible happened. You're still David, I'm still Maya, and we're still figuring this out together." David felt something inside him relax that he hadn't even realized was tense. Being this close to Maya, feeling her warmth, seeing the way she looked at him like he was exactly where he belonged, it was overwhelming and comforting at the same time. "I love you too," he said, and was surprised by how natural the words felt coming out of his mouth. Maya's smile was radiant. "I know you do. I could see it in the way you listen when I talk about things that matter to me. The way you remember little details about things I've told you. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. You notice that? David, I'm a photographer. I make a living noticing the way people look at things. And you look at me like I'm the most interesting thing you've ever seen." They lay there together as evening light filtered through Maya's bedroom window, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Maya traced patterns on David's chest with her finger, while she told him about the first time she'd realized she wanted to be a photographer. David played with her hair while he shared stories about his childhood that he'd never told anyone else. The physical closeness felt natural and right, but it was the emotional intimacy that surprised David the most. He'd always thought that being this vulnerable with someone would feel scary or dangerous. Instead, it felt like coming home. "Maya," David said after they'd been lying there for what felt like hours. Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me talk myself out of this. For pulling me down onto these sheets and refusing to let me go. For being patient with how scared I was." Maya lifted her head to look at him. "David, you weren't scared of me. You were scared of how much you wanted this. There's a difference." She was right, as usual. David had wanted this connection, this intimacy, this feeling of belonging with someone, but wanting something that much had felt dangerous. "What changed your mind?" he asked. "About telling me how you felt tonight?" Maya considered the question seriously. "I realized I was doing the same thing you were doing, waiting for the perfect moment or for some sign that it was safe, or for you to say it first. But perfect moments don't just happen. Sometimes you have to create them." "Is that what this is? A perfect moment?" "I don't know about perfect," Maya said, settling back down against his chest. "But it feels pretty close." As night fell completely, and they could hear the sounds of the city outside Maya's window, David realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. The careful distance he'd always maintained from other people, the protective walls he'd built around his emotions, Maya had somehow managed to dismantle all of it without him even noticing. And instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, he felt free. Free to want things, to feel things, to be present in his own life instead of just observing it from a safe distance. "Maya," he said softly. "Yeah?" "I'm glad you refused to let me go." Her arms tightened around him and David could feel her smiling against his chest. "Get used to it," she said. "I'm not planning on letting you go anytime soon." That night changed everything between David and Maya, but not in the dramatic way David had expected. He'd worried that the morning after would be awkward, that they'd both feel embarrassed or uncertain about what had happened. Instead, he woke up feeling more like himself than he had in years. Maya was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the early morning light change the color of the buildings across the street. When she noticed David was awake, she smiled at him with the same easy warmth she'd always shown, but now with something deeper underneath. "Good morning," she said, bringing him a cup of coffee. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," David said, and realized it was true. The anxiety that usually started the moment he opened his eyes was nowhere to be found. Over the next few weeks, David discovered what it felt like to be truly comfortable with another person. Maya didn't try to change him or fix the things about himself he'd always worried were broken. Instead, she created space for him to just exist without constantly measuring and adjusting himself. Their relationship deepened in small, everyday moments. Maya would show up at his apartment with groceries and cook dinner, while telling him about her day. David learned to anticipate when she was stressed about a difficult project and would bring her favorite tea without being asked. They developed inside jokes and comfortable silences that felt more intimate than conversations. Maya introduced David to parts of her world he'd never experienced. Art gallery openings where they stood in front of photographs that captured raw human emotion and talked about what they saw. Weekend trips to small coastal towns where Maya taught him to see landscapes the way an artist did. Dinners with her friends who welcomed David with the easy acceptance of people who trusted Maya's judgment completely. Her friends were nothing like the people David usually spent time with. There was Jake, a musician who played guitar and coffee shops and somehow made enough money to travel around the country. Lisa was a teacher who spent her summers volunteering at camps for kids who couldn't afford regular vacations. Ben worked at a bookstore and could recommend the perfect novel for any mood or situation. At first, David felt out of place around them. They were all creative, spontaneous people who seemed to make life decisions based on passion rather than security. But Maya's friends had a way of making him feel included without making him feel like he had to pretend to be someone else. "You're good for Maya," Lisa told David one evening when Maya was in the kitchen getting more wine. "She's always been this force of nature, you know, always moving, always creating, always seeing beauty in everything. But with you, she seems more settled. Not in a boring way, but like she's found someone who really sees her." David wasn't sure he believed he was good for anyone, but he was starting to understand what Lisa meant. Maya had always been confident and independent, but now she seemed to have someone to share her discoveries with, someone who appreciated her perspective and wanted to understand the way she saw the world. In return, David found himself sharing parts of his life he'd never revealed to anyone. The loneliness that had driven him into programming as a teenager, when it felt safer to interact with computers than try to figure out what other people wanted from him. His fear that he was somehow fundamentally different from everyone else, missing some essential component that made relationships easy and natural. Maya listened to these revelations without trying to fix him or tell him his fears were silly. She just acknowledged that those experiences had shaped who he was, and that the person he'd become was someone she loved. "You know what I think?" Maya said one night as they walked through David's neighborhood after dinner. "I think you've spent so much time protecting yourself from getting hurt that you forgot people aren't usually trying to hurt you in the first place." "What do you mean?" "Most people are just trying to figure things out, same as you. They're not sitting around thinking about how to make David's life harder. They're worried about their own stuff." It was such a simple observation, but it hit David like a revelation. He had been approaching relationships like they were puzzles he might solve incorrectly, when really they were just conversations between two people trying to understand each other. Their physical relationship deepened, with the same gradual intensity as their emotional connection. Maya approached intimacy with the same fearless curiosity she brought to her art, and David discovered that with her, he could let go of the self-consciousness that had always held him back. But it wasn't passion that bound them together most strongly. It was the small domestic moments that surprised David with their significance. The way Maya hummed absently while making coffee in the morning, moving around the kitchen like she was dancing to music only she could hear. How David learned to read her moods and needs, bringing her favorite snacks when she was working on a challenging project, knowing when she needed to talk through a problem and when she needed quiet space to think. They developed routines that felt like permanence without being discussed or planned. Maya kept a toothbrush at David's apartment. David had a key to her place for the days when she was working late and he wanted to start dinner before she got home. They grocery shopped together on Sundays, wandering through the farmer's market, while Maya photographed interesting vegetables and David calculated whether they were buying too much food for two people to eat before it went bad. 3 months after that first night together, David realized he'd stopped thinking about their relationship as temporary. Maya had become not just someone he loved, but the person around whom his life now organized itself. Not in a dependent way, but like finding the missing piece of a picture he'd been trying to complete for years. The change wasn't just about Maya, though. David was becoming different too. More spontaneous, more willing to try new things, more confident in his own opinions and preferences. Maya's refusal to let him retreat into analytical distance had created space for parts of himself he'd forgotten existed. "You're laughing more," his coworker Tom mentioned one day when David was in an unusually good mood after a frustrating morning dealing with broken code. "Am I?" "Yeah, and you seem less, I don't know, worried about everything. Did you change? Medications or something?" David laughed at the question. "No, I met someone. Must be some person to make you this relaxed. You used to look like you were expecting bad news every time your phone rang." Tom was right. David had spent years waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong, for people to decide he wasn't worth the effort. With Maya, that constant low-level anxiety had simply disappeared. It wasn't that Maya had fixed his problems or changed his personality. She'd just created an environment where the best parts of who he was could exist without apology. The David, who could be funny and thoughtful and genuinely interested in other people, had been there all along, just buried under layers of protective caution. One evening, as they sat on Maya's couch looking through photos from her latest project, David felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the simple fact of her existence in his life. Maya, he said, interrupting her explanation of why she'd chosen a particular angle for a street scene. Yeah? Thank you. For what this time? For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For not giving up when I was being difficult. For making me feel like I'm allowed to be happy. Maya set down the photo album and turned to face him completely. David, you were never difficult, you were just careful. And being careful isn't a bad thing, especially when you're protecting something valuable. What was I protecting? Your heart. And now you're sharing it with me, which makes me the luckiest person I know. David pulled Maya closer to him, marveling at how natural it felt to hold someone he loved and be held in return. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't worried about what would happen next. He was too busy being grateful for what was happening right now. By spring, David and Maya had developed rhythms that felt like they'd always existed. David had officially given Maya a key to his apartment, though they spent most nights at her place, which somehow felt more like home to both of them. They talked about the future in concrete terms now, trips they wanted to take, projects Maya was considering, the possibility of David transitioning to freelance work that would give him more flexibility to travel with her. David's life had become unrecognizable from the carefully controlled existence he'd maintained just 6 months earlier. His apartment, once a monument to order and routine, now showed signs of shared living. Maya's photography books mixed with his programming manuals on the coffee table. Her camera equipment had claimed a corner of his bedroom. The refrigerator was covered with pictures she'd taken of them together. Candid shots that captured moments David didn't even remember posing for. But the biggest change wasn't in his living space. It was in how David moved through the world. He walked differently now, less like someone bracing for impact and more like someone who belonged wherever he was. Co-workers noticed. His building security guard mentioned it. Even the woman who made his coffee every morning commented that he seemed happier. It was during one of his weekly phone calls with his sister Kate that David realized just how completely his life had transformed. You sound different, Kate told. Him and David could hear her smiling through the phone. Happier, but also more like yourself than you've been in years. What do you mean? Remember when we were kids and you used to get so excited about things, like when you'd find a new book you loved or when you figured out how to fix something that was broken? You'd get this energy like you couldn't wait to share what you'd discovered. You sound like that again. David understood what she meant. Maya hadn't changed him so much as she'd created space for parts of himself he'd forgotten existed. The David who laughed easily, who could be spontaneous, who trusted his instincts about emotional connection. That person had been there all along, waiting for someone who would refuse to let him hide. I met someone, David said. I figured. Tell me about her. David found himself talking for 20 minutes about Maya, her photography, her way of seeing beauty in ordinary moments, how she'd taught him to notice things he'd been walking past for years, how she made him feel like the most interesting version of himself. David, Kate said when he finally paused, you're in love. Yeah, I am. Good. It's about time. The conversation with Kate made David realize how settled and permanent his relationship with Maya had become in his mind. They weren't just dating anymore. They were building something together, creating a shared life that felt more real than anything David had ever experienced. But that sense of security was tested when Maya came home one evening in early May with news that changed everything. I got offered something incredible, she said, setting her camera bag down by the door with more force than usual. David could tell she was excited and nervous at the same time. What kind of something? A photography. Residency in New Mexico. 6 months in the desert working with this amazing artist who's been documenting the American Southwest for 30 years. It would be a huge opportunity for my career. David felt his stomach drop. 6 months? I know it's a long time. And I know we just figured out how to be together. But David, this could change everything for me professionally. I'd get to work with equipment I've never had access to. Study with someone whose work I've admired for years, and the desert light there is supposed to be incredible. Maya sat down beside David on the couch, taking his hands in hers. I want to go, she said quietly. But I don't want to go without you. David's first instinct was panic. Leave his job, his apartment, the carefully constructed life that had provided security for so long. Move to a place where he knew nobody and had no plan. But as Maya talked about the opportunity, about the artistic growth the residency would provide, about the chance to document landscapes that were disappearing due to climate change, David found himself listening differently than he would have 6 months ago. 6 months ago, he would have immediately started listing all the reasons it was impossible: the financial risk, the career implications, the uncertainty of temporary living situations. But now, watching Maya's face light up as she described the project, he found himself asking different questions. What if they could make it work? What if this was exactly the kind of adventure he'd been too afraid to consider before? What if the safe, predictable life he'd built wasn't actually serving him anymore? I've been thinking about freelancing anyway, David heard himself say, surprising them both. Maya's eyes widened. Really? Really? I mean, I've been doing the same job for 5 years. I could probably do it in my sleep at this point. And there are companies that hire remote programmers for short-term projects. I've just never had a reason to consider it before. David, are you serious? You'd come with me? The hope in Maya's voice made David's heart race. I'm serious. I mean, we'd have to figure out the logistics, make sure I can get enough work to pay my part of expenses, find out what kind of housing the residency provides. But you'd really consider it? David looked at Maya, at the woman who had pulled him down onto her sheets and refused to let him go, who had somehow convinced him that life was meant to be lived rather than simply endured. Maya, 6 months ago I was reorganizing my closet on Friday nights and calling that a social life. Now I'm in love with someone who sees art in shadows on sidewalks and thinks nothing of driving across the country to document small-town diners. If I can handle that transformation, I think I can handle New Mexico. Maya's smile was radiant. Are you sure? I don't want you to make this decision just because you think it's what I want to hear. David considered the question seriously. Was he sure? No, he wasn't sure about anything except that the thought of Maya leaving for 6 months felt unbearable, while the thought of going with her felt like the most natural thing in the world. I'm not sure about anything, David said finally. But I'm more sure about us than I've ever been about anything else. And I think maybe it's time I stopped making decisions based on what feels safe and started making them based on what feels right. Over the next 6 weeks, they planned their temporary move to New Mexico with the same careful attention David usually reserved for work projects, and Maya applied to creative endeavors. David negotiated a leave of absence from his job and lined up 2 freelance contracts that would cover his expenses. Maya researched housing options near the residency location. They bought camping gear for weekend trips to explore the landscape Maya would be documenting. David's co-workers thought he'd lost his mind. You're leaving a stable job to follow your girlfriend to the desert? His manager asked during their final meeting. I'm taking a sabbatical to support my partner's career while exploring new professional opportunities, David replied, and was surprised by how confident he sounded. The week before they left, David stood in his apartment looking at the boxes that contained his temporarily packed life. The place that had felt like a sanctuary now felt like exactly what Maya had called it months ago: a waiting room. He'd been waiting his whole adult life for permission to really live, and Maya had finally given it to him. On their last night, in the city, they had dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first official date. Maya brought her camera and took pictures of their table, their hands holding wine glasses, the expression on David's face when he laughed at something she said. Any regrets? Maya asked as they walked back to her apartment for the last time. About leaving? About any of it. Meeting me, letting me pull you into this crazy adventure, changing your whole life for someone you've known less than a year. David stopped walking and turned to face her under a streetlight. Maya, you didn't pull me into anything. You showed me a door I didn't know existed and helped me find the courage to walk through it. And now? Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Maya stepped closer to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Even if we're about to drive across the country to live in the middle of nowhere for 6 months? Especially then. The next morning, they loaded Maya's car with cameras, computers, and everything they needed to build a temporary life together in the high desert of New Mexico. As they drove out of the city, David felt something he'd never experienced before. The thrilling uncertainty of a future written in partnership with someone who loved him enough to refuse to let him settle for less than the fullest version of himself. Maya reached across the car's center console and took his hand, laughing softly at something on the radio, and David understood that this was what it meant to be held by love, not constrained by it but liberated into becoming who he was always meant to be. The woman who had pulled him down onto her sheets that October evening had been offering more than intimacy. She had been offering transformation, and David had finally been brave enough to accept it.